Hey, how are you doing? I ranked all of the Emmy's Best Series Comedy videos with my friend Mish, but she's not in this one, so I don't have to pay her part of the AdSense I don't make.
Wait, I get hypothetical AdSense money?
Shh, remember your cue. Remember your cue. But if I just did the comedies, my completionist brain would drive me crazy, so I'm going to do the dramas too. So I need to find somebody edgy to do this with.
Hi?
Not yet. Somebody who loves Shadow the Hedgehog and complains about how there aren't enough F-bombs in Marvel movies or something.
Hold on. It's true, applying for law school has killed something deep within my soul, but I really like TV. I'm really excited to get into what I think is a really competitive year, with some of my honestly favorite shows ever being on this list.
Riveting. I came up with my own ranking of these nominees, and so did Nitish. We later averaged up our rankings and came up with a new consensus list. I wanted to clarify that we weren't ranking these shows as a whole, we were ranking them by their latest season, just as the Emmys technically work. As I mentioned in the previous video, that is not necessarily fair. It gives a leg up to long-running shows that stuck the landing. It is also a double-edged sword, hindering long-running shows if they squandered their good graces. Hey, I'm not the one who thought up the idea to award and compare television shows, I just decided to rank all of their nominees, which is a much weirder thing to do. Also, I'm gonna try not to spoil any of these shows too severely, but if you really want to see these shows for yourself, feel free to just see where we rank them and skip to the next segment, as listed in the description below. I mean, we all know Nitish can't be concise, so who knows what he's gonna do.
Wait, didn't you give a spoiler-filled 8-minute rant about Ted Lasso in the last video?
Riveting. Number 8.
These kind of long black.
Yards away from the $2 plus any tolls.
Item number is...
Nitish and I both ranked The Crown Season 5 as our number 8. The Crown is House of the Dragon without the dragons, so it's automatically worse. But if that explanation did not suffice, The Crown follows the life of the recently deceased now Queen of England from coronation to post-Y2K. Every 2 seasons, the show changes its cast to reflect its aging characters, and Season 5 thus does once again as the Queen enters her elder years.
It's the 90s.
John Major is Prime Minister, and happiest couple, Diana and Charles, makes everybody around them super uncomfortable. Fun times. Before we delve into that though, I have been entertaining the idea that the extent of which you like The Crown might depend on how much you like the monarchy. After all, the creator of the show is a self-professed royalist, and, like it or not, I feel like the show has done more to keep the monarchy going today than anything Charles has ever done.
Dig that crazy rhythm.
Now that I have thrown that idea out there, I would immediately like to throw it out, because I don't give a shit about the monarchy. I'm American! I'm one of those politics nerds who knew more about the UK's prime ministers than any members of the royal family. For the longest time, I thought the Queen and Philip were related. And given my completely neutral opinions on whether the monarchy should live or die, I found the show very well written and engaging, until you get to Season 5. Maybe the show staff was struggling to transition to the new era, or the new cast, but the pacing came to a grinding halt and the characters became the most uninteresting and most unlikable versions of themselves. The first episode of the season is all about how the Queen does not want to decommission her taxpayer-funded yacht in the face of an economic recession. And I am not entirely convinced the show knows that is stupid. And I get it, the yacht is symbolic of age or whatever, but I kind of took it for granted that I would somehow be interested in watching that, especially when I'm no longer following any familiar faces. Literally, I mean. I was always interested in history, and I've been curious to learn more about modern English history. For some reason, my favorite part of The Crown has been getting a glimpse at these pivotal events through episodes such as Dear Mr. Kennedy, Aberfan, Moondust, and Fagin, with the perspective of the otherwise mysterious royal family being the through line that connects these episodes together. My theory is that they needed to really focus on telling these interesting stories because people nowadays probably don't already know or care much about Philip or Margaret in the 1950s, but once Diana came into the picture, it became too easy for the crown. Yes, I'm blaming the decline on the crown on Diana, because everybody knows who Diana is. Everybody's already interested in Diana. And I think around season 5 especially, the show started to get a bit more complacent just having her in the scene, rather than doing all that many interesting things with her. That is not to say this season is never great. I think they actually hit a decent stride in the middle. My favorite in season 5 is without a doubt that episode that dealt with the Romanov family, which, like the very best of these earlier seasons, explores a fascinating bit of recent history I didn't know about, and how that is potentially connected to the complicated relationship between Elizabeth and Philip. The royal drama also felt very interesting in episodes like Fireworks, which depicted Diana's famous interview on Guy Fawkes Day, but we get a lot more shopping disputes, love affairs, and in the season finale we get back to the yacht yippee! It became less of a historical drama and more of a soap opera. In season 5, it truly felt as though the royals have nothing more to contribute to the world. No more power, nothing more to give. And yet they keep whining and fussing about the world forgetting about them. It's like watching a multi-million-dollar Netflix drama about your parents complaining about you not calling home enough. If seasons 1 to 4 did a decent job making me, again, a neutral American, sympathetic towards the monarchy, season 5 might have been a sort of tipping point that soured me on the monarchy, because the show itself starts to feel just as tired and lame as its subject material. It makes sense that season 6 is the last season, and it would have made sense that Elizabeth was the last monarch, but...
Take that
Crazy rhythm.
I haven't seen season 6 yet, by the way. I do want to say that I think the cast puts in some very good work. It is difficult to beat the likes of Claire Foy and Olivia Colman, who played the Queen in previous seasons, and yeah, Imelda Staunton does not match up to them here. But I do think that is due to a lack of screen time and material rather than the performer. The Queen does not have much to do at all, but when she is on the screen, Staunton proves highly proficient. As a whole, the Queen has felt like the most cohesive and singular character throughout these past 5 seasons. Despite going through 3 different actresses, she never once felt off to me, and that is due to some S-grade performances alone. It goes without saying that Elizabeth Debicki is wonderful as Diana. Though I had problems with how the character was written here, Debicki is well deserving of being the only performer to be nominated for an Emmy out of this season. Dominic West playing Charles is very good too, even if I have a soft spot for season 4's iteration of the character for being a punchable little twerp boy.
I hug who I love.
But that's just me. I think it should be illegal to make Charles look attractive. Anyway, likewise, I will continue to compliment the craftsmanship of The Crown as it continues to look aesthetically solid and movie quality, even if I tend to prefer a little bit more style over polish myself. All of these come together to make season 5 a passable experience as a whole. I certainly wouldn't stop watching the show if you've gotten this far and already liked the previous seasons. Just be warned, you're in for rockier terrain this time around, especially as this new season begins.
So, a little bit about me. My parents are from India, and I'm from the US. Do you know what those 2 countries have in common? The British government colonized them both.
Breaking news. I'm everyone. And everyone in the world is me.
I'm president.
So when I got ready to watch The Crown at Mark's behest, let's be real, there's no way I was watching this by myself, I poured some tea down the nearest drain in my own mini tea party, and got ready to watch some royalist propaganda. But the show isn't really good royalist propaganda, at least not to someone who's not already drunk the Earl Grey flavored Kool-Aid. Case in point, the ridiculous bit about the yacht that Mark mentioned. The showrunners play this scene like she's a war veteran, fighting with the government that has abandoned her at the hospital queue, but dedicated viewers, she is upset because she didn't get her yacht renovated. I'm not denying that the Queen did a service to the British people in the past. Certainly the Crown was a great source of comfort during the war, nor am I denying that she or the institution named after her headpiece do a service to the British people. A national symbol that unifies the country is incredibly powerful, and particularly so when many of the royal family seem so devoted to the country, and I am truly sorry for the British people's loss. But I'm racking my mind from what I saw in this season of the TV show, and I can't think of a single example of the Queen or royal family depicted. That's not to say she didn't do more than that. just that the writers of The Crown didn't show me that she did more than that. Doing anything other than serving as a living rubber stamp, an octogenarian pep rally leader to be rolled out for openings to hospitals and parks and factories and so on and so forth. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't enjoy having her schedule, nor would I enjoy being the subject of so much public intrigue, but I don't think I'd have the arrogance to demand that the public pay for renovations to my yacht, while huge swaths of them don't know if their next paycheck is going to cover their next meal. The Crown plays this completely straight. And honestly, if the Crown portrays her doing that, then it has to show me her doing something of real import. But the way the show portrays the royal family is having this immense sense of self-import, also rarely justifying their actual importance as almost character assassination. And another large part of my issues with The Crown stem from the episode where the Fayyeds were introduced. Muhammad Fayyed looks on with astonishment at the British colonization of Egypt and decides that British culture is the most superior culture in the world. He's a real person, that's a real reaction. Okay, but The Crown does very little to undercut that reaction, to critique his obsession with tea and grand estates as a response to seeing his own culture decimated and his country oppressed. Again, that's how a lot of people reacted. I personally know people in India who reacted the same way, and there are plenty of American Anglophiles. But this reaction, Muhammad Fayyed's reaction, as it's portrayed, isn't interrogated enough to be insightful or interesting fare for a TV show. See, The Crown, not the TV show here, the institution, is a symbol, and its symbology has been contested for a long time, but the showrunners seem only interested in promoting the version in which the royal family's presence as a locus of the patriotism and faith of the British people is vitally important right now. It is dismissive of issues like cost and excesses, presenting them but failing to really interrogate them, and it just fails to reckon with the fact that for huge swaths of the global population, Britain is not a kind old lady with a stiff upper lip, but a troop of young men with guns. That doesn't mean that's what Britain is, but there's no grappling with Britain's complicated historical legacy, not even any half-hearted apologia. They point out all the colonialism, and jump right back into character drama. It's not even cogent enough to qualify as royalist propaganda. Half of the time, it just assumes that we're on their side. Perhaps a more courageous writer would have looked at the royal family and tried to dissect them, really question the institution. I'm really fine with them taking a viewpoint, but if they had been a little more reflective, they could have argued their case in a way that didn't seem so thin. They should have perhaps shown me a historical institution reckoning with its own impotence in a new era, but frankly all the Crown managed to show me was a broken family that has spent the better part of a century refusing to leave the party, clinging on to their perch at the head of a now faded empire, lions inflicted with arthritis, trapped in a papier-mâché cage to serve as models by a cartoonist who's only interested in selling t-shirts and gossip rags. I was hoping that the Crown would show me the inner workings of an institution that I didn't really have a prior attachment to, maybe enlighten me on its value, teach me about a country I'd studied in classes but have never lived in. I was watching with, if not an entirely open mind, at least an open mind to having an open mind. But The Crown Season 5's showrunners did such an uninspired job of trying to sing the institution's praises that it ended up convincing me of its failures. Maybe that's the IRL royal family's fault, maybe they are in fact useless, but even me, an American who's the son of 2 Indians, can't imagine that the British royal family is as useless as this season of The Crown makes them out to be. So in a flabbergasting twist, I feel the need to defend the British royal family from this insult.
Number 7.
Dan?
I ranked Yellowjackets Season 2 as my number 7, Nitish ranked it number 6. Yellowjackets follows a fictional team of high school girls and a competitive soccer team who get stranded on an island after a plane crash. They later start a cult and do some cannibalism. That's not a spoiler, it's revealed in the first 10 minutes. Yellowjackets cuts back and forth between the girls on the island and the survivors' adult lives 25 years later, after a blackmail attempt that forces them to come together to cover up their actions. In Season 2, we learn more about how things started to escalate on the island, while the adult women find some of the madness in their youth coming back. Is it a lot? Yes. Perhaps too much? Yes, but it's mostly interesting stuff. Not only are we switching back and forth between 2 different points in time, the show is pretty good at telegraphing when each thing is happening but you still gotta pay attention, but each of the main girls have their own plot points in each of these respective points in time, and due to the show's increasingly surrealistic nature, it is not always clear what is real and what are just delusions. Shauna has trouble adjusting to domestic life. Sure, Ty gets possessed by a demon. Great. What? The show often teeters back and forth between vastly different tones, too. Sometimes it feels as though it switches back and forth between dark comedy and horror, rather than just being a cohesive whole. At one moment, we see a teenage girl dealing with a traumatic stillbirth, and the next we see the girls have petty relationship arguments. At one moment, we see this, and then they just start eating each other. I don't know what to tell you. Considering all of these different plot lines, counting past and present, we're probably talking a few dozen different plot points to keep track of. I don't think I'm over-exaggerating. It is miraculous that Yellowjackets makes it work 90% of the time, but the 10% when it does get overwhelming, or when the pieces don't quite fit, does hold the show back for me. Season 2 does feel more overstuffed than 1, but all in all, I would say they're about even in quality. I wouldn't have nominated it personally, but I do know folks who I would recommend the show to, especially the edgy young adult women in my life. My friends are the reason I can't sleep well at night.
In 1989, political scientist Francis Fukuyama wrote an essay in the National Interest called The End of History, in which he argued that liberal democracy is the natural endpoint of political development. He expanded on this in his 1991 book of the same title, arguing that humans have a fundamental and primal desire to be recognized, and that people will fight for democracy in order to be recognized as citizens by the state. He doesn't say that events will stop happening, or that democracy will win and never backslide, just that democracy as an idea wins. And proof of that notion can be found in the lies that autocrats tell. Even our little planet's cruelest dictators, like Vladimir Putin, feel the need to hold mock elections. Because democracy as an idea has been so accepted that it's really the only way to legitimate a system of government anymore. But Fukuyama was worried about the end of history, and indeed suspected that successful democracy might be its own undoing. Because that need to be recognized, that need to be seen as successful, to dominate, to win, is pretty fundamental to humanity. And if democracy completely wins and the system ends up working and everybody gets free healthcare and college and so on and so forth, to quote Fukuyama himself, the struggle for recognition, the willingness to risk one's life for a purely abstract goal, the worldwide ideological struggle that called forth daring, courage, imagination, and idealism, will be replaced by economic calculations, the endless solving of technical problems, environmental concerns, and the satisfaction of sophisticated consumer demands. Perhaps this very prospect of centuries of boredom at the end of history will serve to get history started once again. The pilot of Yellowjackets, Season 1, I haven't even gotten to the season we're reviewing for the Emmys yet. The pilot of Yellowjackets started us off in New Jersey in 1991. I can't imagine a more boring place. And you could see Fukuyama's worries start to come to life in all things, in the cruelty of a high school girls' soccer team. Thaisa, who has endless ambition, breaks a girl's shins with a slide tackle because she looks like she might hold them back for states. Shauna sleeps with her best friend's boyfriend. They each try to claim things, seek things, fight for things, in lieu of that worldwide ideological struggle that Fukuyama's talking about that isn't really found in 1991 affluent New Jersey. They find their own little struggles, in which daring, courage, imagination, and idealism can arise nonetheless. Mundane struggles, but they manage to find them. For example, in 2021, in the more modern timeline, Thaisa runs for state senate, and Shauna is again desperately bored, so she cheats on her husband with a handsome stranger. The intervening event, of course, is the plane crash and survival in the wilderness that Mark mentioned. A lesser piece of fiction might have treated the savagery of the girls in the wilderness as an aberration, a crazy thing that people do when they're desperate and afraid. But the pilot of Yellowjackets shows us that it's not an aberration, it's just a part of us. The desire for recognition, the boredom, the need to dare and fight and triumph as a constant drone in the bony parts of our skulls. When we're high school students, that's channeled in pettiness in sports or in gossip. When we're bored adults, it's running for state senate or cheating on our spouse. But when the social norms that bind us are removed and food is no longer available in abundance in 1,000 different plastic packages with eerily sterile sheens, those same impulses that kept us alive in the Stone Age come alive again. What makes Yellowjackets' pilot so extraordinary is it shows us the through line in human behavior. These characters weren't broken by their trauma in some generic cliche. Instead, their pre-existing personalities with all their vices were let off the leash that a modern society with its glorious history of violence confined to textbooks has kept them on. And when they had to put the leash back on, as Natalie, one of the soccer players, says in a therapy session 30 years after the events, they lose purpose. So the pilot of Yellowjackets was one of the most intriguing pieces of art I'd come across in a long time. It had a clear voice and such insight, and it promised to be one of the best TV shows I'd ever watched. The last 2 seasons of Yellowjackets have been an exercise in breaking that promise. Basically, the showrunners decided that their extremely good premise needed a little more pizzazz, and they threw a bunch of other stuff in. There needed to be drama, the seeds of brilliant religious commentary that they planted in which religion is really understood and dealt with, is instead abandoned for some psychedelic cult nonsense. Don't get me wrong, the plot is entertaining enough, and I enjoyed my viewing experience, but there was just so much there in the initial premise. Instead of tender meditations on purpose and faith, we get crazy people cults and fugue states and exorcisms caused by people going off medication. Instead of telling a tight story about the way that a group of kids navigate a horrifying scenario and invent these rituals to bind them and to make sense of a world slipping out of their control, we get a messy story that ties a very weird knot between psychological breakdowns and wellness cults. The showrunner said this wonderful spark of an idea about the strangeness of humanity and its inevitable and unstoppable striving. They could have ran it sort of like Eggers the Lighthouse tonally. Where these elements of supernatural and divine are mundane and they're turned into something that's very part of the world. Or maybe they could have played it even straighter than that, but they took the Lighthouse and they turned it into Riverdale.
I'm a weirdo.
Have you ever seen me without this stupid hat on? That's weird.
Granted, a much better version of Riverdale, one that has a lot of the premise and promise that the pilot episode showed, but there is just so much plot, so much cliffhanger, so much drama, and all of these overwhelm the story. This could have been a really, really tight 5 to 10 episode miniseries, and the way they're making it run out for the second season, and the reason that the second season is ranked so low on our list, is just by adding stuff where they really didn't need to. This show could have been amazing, but I don't even think this season should exist.
Number 6.
Please, these gays, they're trying to murder me. Me capisce?
I ranked season 2 of The White Lotus as my number 6, and Nitish ranked it number 7. It was tied with Yellowjackets, but I convinced him. So, The White Lotus is an anthology series, each season following a different ensemble cast of characters, visitors, and staff throughout different chains of the luxurious White Lotus resort. One rather cool hook at the beginning of each season is that it foreshadows that somebody will die by the end of the season, but it doesn't tell you who, just the amount of bodies. Season 1 took place in Hawaii, and Season 2, the topic of the video, takes place in Sicily. But I'm still going to talk about Season 1 a lot. I really didn't like it. If I was considering the season for this list, I would have easily ranked it on the bottom, and I would have locked Nitish in a room with me and argued with him until he put it on the bottom too.
Boy, oh boy, there's always one.
Political and social satire is a mixed bag for me. Sometimes I get some of the best and most engaging entertainment of all time, and that makes me happy. But other times the social satire tag can lead to trite, preachy, and lazy storytelling that feels emboldened enough by its Twitter brownie points to avoid the most basic components of nuance or good writing, or in the most egregious cases, to avoid writing a story at all. And that makes me sad. This is the obligatory part in the video when I make it clear it's not necessarily that I disagree with their politics, nor am I saying art shouldn't be political. I would actually argue that expecting all art to be completely apolitical is totally irrational, because politics is about people and stories are also about people. What I am saying is that art needs to be more than political in order to be good. Adam McKay films are the most immediate examples that come to mind for me, but I'd very much consider Season 1 of The White Lotus to be cut from the same paper straw. I call this kind of show and/or television Thanksgiving satire. While a good piece of satire like Parasite or F*** it, you know it's coming up sooner or later, Succession uses class or politics as a springboard on which to launch intriguing stories or motivate otherwise interesting characters, Thanksgiving satire settles for sitting its characters in a room, or bonus points if it's a literal dining table like actual Thanksgiving, and just have its characters prattle on about their politics. #deep. I would argue Don't Look Up is Thanksgiving satire. Crash is very much Thanksgiving satire, so is Season 1 of The White Lotus. But this video is not about Season 1 of The White Lotus, it's about Season 2 of The White Lotus. And I found Season 2 to be a remarkable improvement. In the HBO behind-the-scenes video for The White Lotus released alongside the first season on streaming, series creator and former Survivor contestant Mark White, more on that later, or Probably not, described a show like this.
White Lotus is about a group of people who spend a week at this boutique hotel, and then there's the people that work at the hotel, and their lives are not exactly paradise.
And the cast described it like this.
White Lotus is about the problems that people think that they have in comparison to real problems.
I think this is typically taken to mean the White Lotus is about privilege. Privilege is not very interesting.
I don't think you appreciate how tough things are for your brother. He is a straight white man. Nobody has any sympathy for them right now.
I think a more interesting way of framing that idea, and probably what White meant, wait, is that why the show is called White Lotus? Anyways, was that this was a show about power. How power affects people, who has power and who does not, how does one acquire power, and what even is power anyway? Stuff like that. Season 2 explored power in a more intriguing way. If Season 1 examined power through the lens of money and wealth, Season 2 examined power through the lens of sex. They really explore it too. Often. A lot of times. Don't watch this one with your parents. Anyway, this led to some legitimately interesting dynamics that, while not entirely above cliche or obvious talking points, that grandpa character felt like he was written deliberately to make me mad, felt overall fresher now that it has more interesting questions to dabble with. Despite my initial reservations, I found myself really intrigued with this sloppy cast of messy freaks, and I was kept on my toes, constantly guessing where each plotline would go in the next episode or how they would intersect in the end, and more often than not, I was surprised about where the show decided to go. All in all, The White Lotus Season 2 gets my award for Most Improved, and I'm actually really excited for Season 3, which apparently takes place in Thailand and is about death. Maybe the show will keep on getting better. Maybe, by the time we get to Season 6, this could be Breaking Bad level television. Maybe then I'll have to lock Nitish in a room with me again, until he agrees to rank it number 1 as well. Okay, here's a funny clip of Mark White I found on Survivor.
Hold this. Don't lose it. And don't stab it in your foot.
I actually like Mark White, by the way.
I don't have super sophisticated thoughts on White Lotus. I thought it was well conceived, well acted, well executed. I just didn't think it was all that interesting. White Lotus is overly devoted to its thesis, which it hits us over the head with again and again and again. People are avaricious, greedy things with deep longings. This season of the show mostly tries to show this to us through sex. White Lotus's men leer at women and suck them dry like leeches, and its women find ways to use their predation to get their piece of the pie. Sex here isn't intimate, it's almost purely transactional. Even at its most romantic, it's an act of bizarre reconciliation committed between two spouses after they both had affairs with different members of the same couple, and this feels less like a long-awaited return for two lovers and more like a denouement or contract negotiation. But the White Lotus's characters felt like those wavy things outside car dealerships, garishly larger than life, blowing with the wind, and fundamentally hollow. They're caricatures of themselves contorted into dull shapes used to advance a duller thesis, and I didn't feel like they had hopes or dreams. They have interests. Mia loves singing, for example. Ethan has a chip on his shoulder and an intense need to be recognized. Tanya wants to be cherished, but they don't exactly have weight. The thesis just overwhelms the characters. I don't think the show had much to say with any of them more than just people are avaricious, greedy things with deep longings. As a result, I was left with a show that, while entertaining, had the emotional depth of its characters scooped out and spread too thin over too dull, a ham-fisted message. You might think I'm measuring the show against an unreasonably high bar, but I'm not. I'm measuring it by the bar that other shows in this list reach and set.
Number 5.
King Viserys of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar.
I ranked House of the Dragon number 4, and Nitish ranked it number 5. House of the Dragon is The Crown with dragons, which does make it better, but that's not the only reason I personally ranked the show this high. I should also point out that I have not watched any Game of Thrones before watching House of the Dragon. I don't know how that influences my opinions, but make of that what you will. I'm judging House of the Dragon as its own thing, and I really liked it. I tend to be a sucker for fantasy world building and politics, and House of the Dragon is basically high fantasy C-SPAN, even down to the conspiracy nuts and age debates. While it took me a while to become emotionally invested in this world, George R.R.R. Martin depicts a colder fantasy world that is usually not my cup of tea, I became immediately engaged with the main question posed within the first episode: who will take over after the king? As of now, the king is still young and powerful, nowhere close to death. But after the death of his wife and his lack of sons, the answer is uncertain, and it becomes clear to the audience that there are many parties invested in one outcome over another. Should it be his only child, Rhaenyra, despite being a woman in a traditionally male-assigned role? Should he remarry and try to father a son? If so, who does he marry? Whose bloodline takes over the Iron Throne? Or should it be his brother, Doctor Who? You begin to learn about these interested parties as they attempt to scheme their way closer to their preferred outcome, and there are others who choose to defend the king's eventual decision to allow his only daughter to succeed him. It is a simple storytelling hook, but nonetheless an effective one. Ask a question, and spend the rest of the show trying to answer it. That reminds me of another show on this list. I was especially interested in the relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent, two childhood friends whose interests begin to conflict with one another as a bitter animosity eventually forms amongst them. This all comes to a fever pitch in the penultimate episode of the show, The Green Council.
What else was I supposed to do? The guy I wanted to win didn't win!
Which is basically a feature-length anxiety attack filled with political scrambling and rising egos. The main character isn't even in this episode at all, but it is just wonderful television that successfully defines where the show will likely go in its next season. I do have some criticisms of the show, however. House of the Dragon is not the easiest viewing. Its themes can be intense, its episodes are all over an hour long, and there are so many names and bloodlines and allegiances and factions to keep track of that it can easily become overwhelming, especially considering there's usually a time skip between each episode. I don't think this issue is necessarily avoidable, but it does hold it back a tiny bit. I mean, midway through the first season, there's already a Crown-esque cast change as the characters have gotten older, but House of the Dragon is also not the easiest to view, like, physically, with your eyes. Yes, it's the same old song and dance, but the lighting is too dark in so many scenes, and it was very hard to tell what's going on. I couldn't watch the show on my TV because it's fairly low quality and it was hard to make out the detail from a distance. I had to watch the full show on my Pixel tablet, and even then there were points when I had to really lean my face into the thing, or turn off the lights in my room to tell what's going on. Maybe I'm particularly sensitive to this stuff, but it added a new level of frustration to my viewing experience. That is a shame too, because the show looks genuinely really good. That is, when it finally decides to step into the visual medium. All in all, it's hard to resist the central appeal of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. Power struggles, real or fantastical, will always be interesting and relevant in our own daily lives. I mean, I am fully aware that Nitish is planning his own coup to assassinate me and take over this channel. Mish might be in on it too. Yes, you cockroaches! I know what you're planning, and it won't work! I am the MapjStudios.
Mark makes good points. Regarding the coup, it's already underway and there's nothing you can do to forestall it. I think this show is really solid, and at some points it surpasses the original Game of Thrones. And one of those high points for me was episode 4. This episode builds to 2 sex scenes, don't watch with your parents, each directed with a sharp eye to the actions and internal thoughts of 2 of House of the Dragon's best characters, Rhaenyra Targaryen and Alicent Hightower. This diptych, at first blush, touches similar themes to White Lotus, desire, gender, and power, but House of Dragon is, I think, much more successful in tackling complex themes. We are shown power affecting these characters involved in wildly differing ways according to their social class and gender, and we are shown how these characters' desires are either legitimated or cloistered by the same factors. So how does House of the Dragon manage to hit us harder without it feeling like they're hitting us over the head? The secret is their better drawn characters, but House of the Dragon feels much more successful at hitting the same themes while also feeling much less didactic. All art, in some way or another, is about human experience. While each of our experiences are different, certain rhythms emerge, to use Dewey's verbiage, like the effect of class or gender on desire. In my opinion, White Lotus focused on those rhythms, but they felt a little too removed from the human experience which they emerge from. Here, Rhaenyra and Alicent felt so real and rich, and in my opinion, were far more complete than any characters in White Lotus. So as a result, the issues that they faced and the themes that emerged from those issues felt much more compelling. Unfortunately, House of the Dragon also falls to some of Game of Thrones' lows, with some moments where the writing isn't strong enough to meet the demands of the plot. Recall the last season of Thrones where they needed Dany to be drowned a dragon and she was sniped by a random boat off screen because she forgot about the
Iron Fleet.
Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet.
There are a few such moments in this show. Daemon Targaryen needs a moment where he does something cool. So he runs head first into a beach surrounded by hundreds of archers and fully armed men, and he somehow manages not just to survive, but to win.
How could this happen to me?
It's ridiculous. Now, I sympathize with the writers. They have to keep a vast network of interconnected plot points that are affecting each other, and they need to travel them in sync for the viewer. And when you can't get from point A to point B using the trusty strong bridge of logic, you might have to brave your way across the gap by stretching the suspension of disbelief as far as it will carry you. But honestly, after 7 seasons of Thrones, it's definitely not carrying me any farther, and I suspect even first-time watchers of House of the Dragon will quickly find themselves in a similar position to me.
So, this video has been roughly 7 months in the making, and I want to keep this part simple. If you like this video and want to see more Emmys and Oscars stuff, for example, comedy nominees ranked video with my other review buddy, Mish, please consider subscribing to my channel, MapjStudios, and give a ring-a-ding-bing of that little bell icon. Okay, fine. Anything you want to add, Nitish?
Yeah, I do. In such a complicated era of political divisiveness and where art is such a contested... Are you playing me off?
You mean like how the Emmys do to move people along when they're
taking too long?
No, I would never.
The hell?
Number 4.
Move. Move.
I ranked the first season of The Last of Us as my number 3, and Nitish ranked it number 4. The Last of Us kicks ass. Indiscriminately. It kicks my ass and it kicks zombie ass. I would say it kicked Nitish's ass too, but he's applying to law school, and I already said zombie ass. Unlike Nitish, I haven't played the original video game The Last of Us is adapted from, and I'm in general not a big fan of zombie-tainment.
Carl! 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 Carl!
But boy oh boy did I appreciate The Last of Us as a standalone TV show. One of the reasons I was never into zombie stuff is because they all often look and feel like the same thing, but The Last of Us adds a cool conceptual and aesthetic twist to the zombie equation. And turns out that's mushrooms, who knew? It's Parasect from Pokemon, it's literally Parasect, he was the key. Fungal-controlled zombies is such a strikingly creepy idea, especially because I heard the video games imply that humans are still alive and feeling pain throughout the whole thing, but it leads to some unusual moments of beauty too. In this post-apocalypse, nature has reclaimed everything in kind of an unbelievably quick time frame, but who cares, just look at this. I just wanna lay here and chill, put on some lo-fi beats to study and relax to. Oh, I forgot about the zombies! Naturally, the thread that keeps the story moving is the relationship between gruff mercenary Joel and spunky 14-year-old Ellie, played wonderfully by Pedro Pascal and especially Bella Ramsey. Throughout the many ups and downs of this story, it feels so satisfying to watch their initially contentious relationship become a legitimately loving one between found father and found daughter. And it becomes shocking as hell to see where the show ultimately takes this new loving relationship. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, just wow. The show also features a highly talented and standout cast of cameos, thanks to its semi-episodic nature, including Melanie Lynskey? And she's not a zombie? I would have thought she would have gone around eating people again.
I would like to clarify that Mark is not talking about the actual Melanie Lynskey eating people.
No, I am. My favorite episode is Long Long Time because duh. On paper, this episode feels out of place, stopping everything it was doing in order to dedicate itself to a fairly normal romance story between an extroverted man and Ron Swanson.
Don't sass me, Burkus.
All the while, the zombie stuff feels more like a backdrop that doesn't really affect the plot. But that's the beauty of this story. In a world where danger is everywhere, everybody's on the go, and death is so common, it becomes so much more touching to watch a pair of lives play out in their own time. Time! Life takes a long, long time, and that's a luxury we have but so seldom appreciate with the lack of zombies in our lives. If it wasn't for another obvious example coming later up, I might have called Long Long Time the singularly best television episode of this year, and I cannot stop listening to the original song Long Long Time. It made my Spotify Wrapped because of this episode. Now that everybody agrees that The Last of Us TV show is great, I'm super excited for the second season to come out. Based off of the first part of The Last of Us 2 video game, there will not be the same consensus. And I am drilled.
This show is truly excellent. Pedro Pascal's Joel became the internet's daddy. Gosh. Bella Ramsey's Ellie became our collective daughter, and we winced and sobbed with them both. There are some ridiculous supporting performances. Nick Offerman is the obvious one, but also huge shoutouts to Melanie Lynskey, and to my personal favorite, Kevon Woodard. If you don't remember, he plays Sam, the young boy with a penchant for superhero comics. That's his first job, y'all. The actor is 10 years old, and he wasn't just good. He, in my opinion, carried a very emotionally weighty episode. To have such talent at such a young age, I know who I'd vote for if I was an Emmys voter, and I'm really excited to watch his future work. The Last of Us is, yes, a zombie show. But like Mark says, the show shines in the way that it portrays life. It shows us these beautifully realized characters, each with a profound sense of interiority. A lesser show about zombies might have just focused on fear and loathing and the good old, the humans are the real monsters trope. But this show also shows humanity's tenderness, its love, its imagination, its wonder, its fundamental and inalienable beauty. The Last of Us is an eulogy to humanity as its embers fade in a long night, and an ode to the little sparks that can still catch and transfix us in the dark. But I'm so sorry. This is a ranking video for the Emmys, and as much as I love The Last of Us, it's just not an original work of art. The 2013 video game that shares the same name is, and I think that has to count against it. I don't think it deteriorates the viewing experience for a first-time viewer. It's still amazing, and you should still definitely watch it. But the issue is that with the very admittedly awesome notable exception of the episode Long Long Time, huge swaths of the most compelling beats of the show are shot-for-shot remakes of the original. Sure, the voice acting is now complemented with very good face acting instead of very good motion capture, and a few pieces of dialogue are edited, but it's fundamentally the same story. What it comes down to for me is this. I don't have a fraction of the talent required to write or direct The Last of Us, probably not any of the shows on this list, but if you gave me an HBO budget and cinematographers and actors and everything else that Zaslav is trying to set fire to, I could probably cobble together a show that would still get nominated for an Emmy, just by copying the video game. Again, The Last of Us is still an amazing, incredible show, but so are the other 3 shows Mark and I rank above it, and this minor, admittedly nitpicky knock against it are enough to drag it down when it's facing such insanely stiff competition.
Number 3.
So what do I sacrifice? Everything!
I ranked Andor number 5, Nitish ranked it number 2. It's technically tied with The Last of Us on our consensus list, but let's give it to Nitish, he needs this one. I wasn't as into Andor as Nitish was. Honestly, I'm not as into Star Wars as I think Nitish is.
This is madness.
However, Andor might be one of the best things Star Wars has put out in its new era, if only I cared about the majority of its characters, or remembered their names. What's his name again? Obviously I still liked Andor, I ranked it 5th. I liked it a lot. Andor plays with themes of resistance versus oppression better than anything this IP has done before, and I love how the show depicts a tyrannical empire from the perspective of the little people. Stormtroopers are scary again, and all of the most evil people in the galaxy seem to rule as much by boring bureaucracy as they do fear. Andor feels truly catered towards adults, while the rest of Disney's Star Wars feels like it was designed to sell toys. That in of itself makes me want to root for the show and see more like it. The world building is the best part of the show. My favorite episodes are the prison trilogy, but I'm actually going for the first episode in the lineup, Narkina 5, which is dedicated to showing off the environment of the prison, and it is absolutely fascinating how control and oppression is baked into even the architecture of the place, pursuing a goal that keeps getting moved from beyond their reach. The oppressed are pit against each other, all the while the Empire goes so far as to even control the floor on which they walk on. If this isn't grade A science fiction, I don't know what else this could be. Except maybe a behind-the-scenes documentary of that Squid Game game show. Low blow? Is that a low blow? However, the majority of characters who occupy this space are without charm. Except for Luthen, and even then, I think he's writing solely off of that badass monologue at the end of episode 10, which to be fair is a kick-ass monologue. If I cared more about the people involved, on both sides of this tyrannical system, then I would probably value Andor just as much on a personal level as I do an intellectual one. Anyway, this was funny.
Mark, you are a marvel of intellectualism. I've been a Star Wars fan since I was about 6 years old, and so it's extremely surprising to me that I like this show. That might seem like a discontinuity, but viewer, consider the last several years of Star Wars. The Force Awakens was basically just an AI reskin of A New Hope, except with more Marvel-style quips and less heart. I was actually in the camp of people who thought that The Last Jedi was a good movie that happened to be a little bit flawed, and the backlash from the fans after Last Jedi scared Disney so much that they decided never to do anything artistically courageous ever again. They made The Rise of Skywalker, which was just an awful, terrible, artless film.
Nothing will stop the return of the
They made a few Star Wars TV shows before Andor and a few after Andor, all of which have tried to speak to the two neurons in my brain that have fond memories watching Star Wars cartoons growing up with my little brother. Desperately tried to milk out every last drop of nostalgia out of them while missing every part of my mind and soul. And for Ahsoka, honestly, for the first 5 episodes, the nostalgia drip was working, but then it just kind of stopped working, and so for me, the future for Star Wars fans looks bleak. And somehow, in the context of all of this artless trash, Andor, I have no clue how Disney made Andor. Disney, the multi-billion-dollar mass corporation that has grown so adept at making their LGBTQ characters so stealthy that authoritarian governments can edit out any scenes with them at minimal costs to their video editing departments, made a really compelling show about rebellion against authoritarian governments. It's insane! I honestly didn't think that Disney could do this, and I doubt that they'll ever be able to do it again. The writing on the show is insane. As Mark says, it plays with these themes of oppression and liberation so deftly. More deftly than most other works of art that talk about the same do. And more than that, it feels like this show just gets it. I graduated with a degree in international relations, and I'm very shortly going to get a graduate degree in the same, so I'm qualified to say this show actually understands autocracy. It understands the weirdly bureaucratic nature of oppression, internecine pissing contests within coercive institutions that decide whether or not revolutions live or die. For example, minor institutional variations between the recruitment structures of the Tunisian and Egyptian armies led to vastly differing levels of success of revolutions in both those countries. It also understands the way that repressive regimes build little exclaves for the lazily docile, wealthy, and can still repress willy-nilly. Cassian Andor is arrested in a rich beach town without having committed an offense to instigate it. It understands the ways that authoritarian systems use collective punishment and torture in prisons, and how those prisons can serve as hotbeds for radicalization. It understands the way that armed resistance groups are often insular and non-representative, failing to provide the basis for a broad, legitimate rebellion, and that they need to be stitched together and coordinated by deft, moderate politicians, something that should sound pretty familiar to students of recent history in Syria or Myanmar. And I also think that it understands the fact that violent revolutions are just not that successful in ending authoritarian regimes. As Erica Chenoweth notes in a recent Journal of Democracy article, since 2010, less than 34% of nonviolent revolutions and a mere 8% of violent ones have succeeded. Andor is actually really aided by the fact that it's using Star Wars as the background for this allegory, because it's such an outlandish, extraordinary universe that doesn't resemble our own, that we can give it full credit for all the parts that feel similar to our world, and the parts that it feels like they don't really get, we can just explain away by saying, oh, it's a mystical empire with space wizards. Andor did its homework when it came to political science. But politics, as Mark said earlier, is ultimately about humans, and I was most impressed with Andor's understanding of the human stakes behind the revolution portrayed. It got Cyril Karn's venal and banal brutality, Dead Ramiro's desire to hold on to her power in a bureaucratic knife fight, because that's what authoritarians are like in real life. Not Darth Vader standing in front of an emperor who shoot lightning out of his fingertips, but regular people motivated to oppress their neighbors for mundane reasons. It captures the constant fear and desperation of a mole like Lani Young, and hostility, suspicion, cynicism, and often parochialism of resistance fighters like Luthen and Guerrera. It so beautifully captured King Aloy's meek survival turned into emancipatory resolve as the walls of Narkina 5 closed in on him, in honestly one of the most beautiful beautiful episodes of the year if it weren't for Connor's wedding, and it captured that transformation so beautifully because that's what happens when the Iron Fist squeezes and squeezes. It squeezes so much that the only way out of its brutal hold is to slit its wrists. It captured Nemec's idealism and his firm belief in the human capacity to overcome authoritarianism, and his never-ceasing faith in the soul of liberty. It captured Marva's martyrdom, and the way that that martyrdom so beautifully inspired a revolt against the regime. One of my favorite little pieces in this show, blink if you miss it, is Luthen's reaction to the spontaneous and violent eruption of liberty. He's impressed, of course. This is, his team. But all of his cloak and dagger work, all of that leasing of his soul for a freer future that he talks about in another brilliant monologue, all of it is surpassed by the courage and clarity of a letter from a ghost. And this show understands the ways that oppression can alienate the human spirit, force us to bow our heads sheepishly and go along to get along. And it also understands that freedom will always find a way to break through. And that's why I really balk at Mark saying the show didn't have well-written characters. I think it did. I think the characters were extremely well written and they captured so many different parts of a very specific experience. But that specific experience that they captured is not an experience that most viewers will have any first-hand experience with. I am so lucky to say that I don't. I know about this from classes I took and from a lifetime of watching people far braver than I risk everything for the right to have say in their future. I think the characters don't make that strong of an impression on folks because the show is about the intricacies of a political revolution, and the closest thing most Disney Plus subscribers have gotten to that, through a fault of their own and definitely to their benefit, is a stray CNN article that they didn't read about a country they don't know. I do think Tony Gilroy and the rest of the writing team could have done a better job about giving the characters some more identifiable universal traits like love and heartbreak and that jazz, and connected these parts to the political experience that everybody isn't familiar with. And I think that despite my appreciation of what the characters are doing for the political plot, it could have been sketched in a more intimate way. But Gilroy, for all of his talents, and this show is tremendous evidence of his talents, is not Solzhenitsyn, so I'm okay with the fact that he doesn't meet the insanely high bar that I'm setting for him. And I think real props really need to be given to this incredibly potent work of political storytelling. It's got a real soul to it, and I hope folks are a little more inspired by Andor to learn about the global struggles against authoritarian regimes that people far braver than I are engaged in every day. I like this show better than any other on this list because it somehow both speaks to my childhood and my very adult academic interests, and I think it achieves something that none of the other shows on this list did. This show has a political force to it, a capacity to inspire. But in addition to the thematic successes of the writing, I am judging these shows on cinematography, editing, acting, score, set design, costuming, etc. And while Andor is incredible, I think one other show manages to outscore it in enough of those other categories that I have to very reluctantly give it the nod.
Number 2.
Rights. The Constitution says you do, and so do I. I believe that until proven guilty, every man, woman, and child in this country.
I ranked Season 6 of Better Call Saul as my number 2, Nitish ranked it number 3. Okay, if you don't want to be spoiled for the last episodes of Better Call Saul, don't watch this! Better Call Saul follows lawyer Saul Goodman, real name James McGill. A former con man, he is attempting to turn his life around and pursue a career in the legal profession. The old habits die hard, and he constantly finds himself tempted by the drug scene around him. The events of most of this show build up to his gradual corruption, until he eventually becomes the bottom-feeding lawyer in Breaking Bad we all know and love.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
However, Season 6 Part 2 mainly focuses on Saul Goodman, or James McGill after the events of Breaking Bad. I told you there'd be spoilers. Where he is forced to live a quiet life of hiding, and bad habits once again die hard. Better Call Saul, like the original Breaking Bad, is a master of writing compelling and versatile characters who can easily toe the line between hilarity, badassery, and heart-wrenching tragedy. Bob Odenkirk, formerly known as a comedian and best known for being an SNL writer, is of course the star of the show, capturing that balance perfectly. If this was any other year against any other competition, he would deserve the Emmy, and honestly I'm still tempted to give it to him because I think he deserves at least one. This is one of the great performances. Granted, in a cast filled with great performances, there are other stellar supporting characters as well. I would feel guilty if I just did not list them out here. Tony Dalton plays a wonderful villain in Lalo, Giancarlo Esposito as Gus, Jonathan Banks as Mike. Why was he not nominated for an Emmy?
I trust the hole in the desert I'd leave you in.
Patrick Fabian as Howard, who isn't given much to do this season, but he does it well. And Rhea Seehorn is legendary as Kim. No wonder she is the star of the next show Vince Gilligan is working on independent of the Breaking Bad universe. This show is beautiful. The first 2 episodes are phenomenal action and release respectively, and the black and white cinematography does wonders in really sucking you in, breaking down the show's already stellar shows and unique composition style into its core basic parts. I was particularly entranced by its use of setting. Better Call Saul does wonders to truly capture the numbing and Dante-esque stretch of nothing that is Omaha, Nebraska. Never since Fargo have I seen a real-life location given so much personality and atmosphere. It's not the most flattering of images, granted. Omaha probably isn't going to build this show a museum after being really artsily called a suburban purgatory before Albuquerque hell. But nonetheless, if I ever end up in Omaha, I don't know, maybe I got hexed by a witch or something, the first thing I ever do is go to a Cinnabon. Bravo, Vince Gilligan, Peter Gould, and all of their very talented collaborators have this marvelous knack to be able to do incredible and clear world building with hardly a lick of exposition. Throughout Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, a fictional world that's just as intriguing as the likes of House of the Dragon is conveyed so easily to the viewing audience, with its own share of big personalities, hierarchies, factions, and rogues. All crystal clear through visual storytelling and a good bit of restraint on the writer's part. Heck, Better Call Saul features some of the best character writing west of the Mississippi, but it doesn't use its writing as a crutch. It's happy to convey everything we need to know through sticky, meaningful images with extra little writing sprinkles. One of my favorite examples in the series is the ice cream cone with the ants crawling over one another in order to climb the top. I maintain that could be its own standalone short film, but we're talking about Season 6. Actually, Season 6 Part 2, the Emmys are really weird. Fine, the penultimate episode in the show, Waterworks, features one of my favorite shots in all of media. I'm talking top 5 easily. Like, a lot of this final part of the show is in black and white, but they manage to sprinkle in color sporadically in order to symbolize the little glimmers of excitement or passion that creep into Jimmy's boring and soul-sucking life after crime. But I didn't need to tell you that. All you needed to see is Jimmy staring at the computer screen and his old commercials reflecting onto his glasses in color. I want to give Vince Gilligan a kiss. Waterworks is not my favorite episode in this part of the show though. It's nippy. Yeah! F*** you! Fly is my favorite episode in Breaking Bad too. I liked it more than Ozymandias. I sure know how to pick 'em. I just really love seeing Jimmy scheme. Can I just have that? But ultimately it is hard to choose because Better Call Saul manages to wrap things up in one of the most satisfying ways imaginable. Maybe I might consider it a problem that this part of the show, unlike the rest of Better Call Saul, really relies on understanding all of Breaking Bad in order to know what's going on, and some scenes definitely lean into fan service territory, not the anime kind.
You sussy baka!
But I think it was earned as far as I'm concerned. Better Call Saul ended with fun and games. The last 4 episodes are a send-off for the entire franchise. And by gosh, now that this prequel has basically reassessed my perspective on the entire saga, what an ending it turned out to be. Quiet, sure. Very much unlike how Breaking Bad ended, but lingering. Golly gee, this should have been my number 1, but this year was just not fair. Both because it was stacked against some really tough competition, and because this season had the slight disadvantage in my mind of being split into 2. As a whole, it's probably number 1 here, maybe. I don't know, and I don't have to know. I don't have to commit. Hooray for easy outs!
I love this show. It's an almost unparalleled character drama that paints some of the most beautifully realized and conceived characters in any show ever. In the past 6 seasons of the show, we've seen lush portraits of Bob Odenkirk's Saul Goodman and Rhea Seehorn's Kim Wexler team to life from blank canvas, brushstroke by brushstroke. They feel a little bit larger than life, but still so lifelike, unfathomably deep, yet intimately known. And in this last half of Season 6, we see these characters finally come to rest. I have too much to say about this show, so a few cursory thoughts. First, let's never try to do the guy falls into a life of crime arc again, because Better Call Saul will never be topped. It tops the already inimitable Breaking Bad. Saul has this mix of impulsivity and petulance and ambition and sympathy that is so immaculately balanced that I'm really shocked they managed to pull it off. Second, Rhea Seehorn's Kim Wexler might be my personal favorite character from a TV show ever. She's tough as nails, brilliant, tender, capricious, loyal, all in one. In any other year, against any other competition, she'd be the obvious shoo-in for all of the Best Actress awards. You might have noticed that I'm really grabbing my thesaurus to fill out the descriptions for each of these characters, but it's just so hard to summarize them pithily. They both overflow with humanity and its ugliness and beauty, and their gradual coupling and decoupling, and ascent and descent, has been some of the most compelling television I have ever seen. And I also want to second Mark, the direction and cinematography is just outstanding. It's hard for a TV show to be able to sustain that over 6 seasons. But I don't think there has been another show on TV as consistently well directed as this one. I said it, I'm thinking about it now more carefully to give me a chance to change my mind, and I'm not taking it. It's the most consistently well directed show in the history of TV. Fight me. Although if you do have any recommendations, hit us up in the comments below. But, unfortunately, I'm not ranking the entire show as a complete narrative arc. I'm ranking the back half of the final season. And in these paltry few episodes, we're not watching an explosion as much as we're watching shrapnels gently settle into the mud. Better Call Saul's slow burn is an amazing viewing experience, and I think it's a more cohesive final product than the final product of the show I have at number 1, if you're counting all the seasons. But just when we're comparing what Emmy voters are going to be comparing, which is a dumb artificial restriction, but okay. In our number 1 show, the explosions start and they just don't stop until the credits roll for the last time. And I think I have to pick that. You think this is bad? This chicanery? They've done worse. Are you telling me Better Call Saul just happens to get snubbed like that? No! He orchestrated it. Mark Mylod. He uses shaky cam like he's Paul Greengrass directing a Bourne movie in 2008, and I loved it. I put him in my own top 10 list, and I shouldn't have. What was I thinking? He'll never change. He'll never change. Couldn't keep his hands off the zoom button, but not our Mark Mylod. Couldn't be our precious Mark Mylod, stealing the Emmys blind. And he gets to be a director? What a sick joke. I should have stopped him when I had the chance, and you have to stop him. You...
Number 1.
Alright, wake up, zombies! Time to activate! Come on! Phones! I want to see some f***ing phones!
Nitish and I both ranked the final season of Succession as our number 1.
I used to have a lot of problems with Succession. First, I didn't really like the first 2 seasons, save a few exceptional episodes and plot lines. Second, and more seriously, I'm not really convinced by its political satire. And I think it's because they focus so much on the family at the absolute peak of the industry. Yes, their relationships are warped and transactional, but I'm not convinced that that's particularly interesting class commentary. The show at times seems trying to be talk about the way that capitalism can alienate people from themselves or something. Okay, but I scarcely think that a show that exclusively focuses on people who sleep in Loro Piana can claim to be saying something interesting about capitalism or class as a whole, right? If you're focusing on the top 1% of the 1% of the 1%, you're not really saying anything about the economic structure that the rest of us are in. I feel similarly about the political commentary, particularly in the season 4 episode America Decides. The election is portrayed entirely through the eyes of 4 rich Roy children. The rancid lies that ATN has been spewing is not something that one of your neighbors believed. It's not something that had an actual effect on the country that enjoys a groundswell of political support. It's just the result of the cynical machinations of a few too obvious allegorical characters. Maybe America Decides wasn't intended as an allegory, but honestly, if you're making an episode about an election-denying conspiracy theories being spread on a news network in 2023, you can't exactly say that you didn't know it was going to come across as allegory, and I don't think you can avoid not grading it as an allegory, given just the overwhelming importance of those events in our current political discourse. But last, I'm not a huge fan of some of the stylistic quirks of Succession, and Mylod's direction with its zooms and shaky cam often rubs me the wrong way. But what I ended up accepting as I voted for Succession, Season 4, as a top spot here, is that Succession maybe isn't trying to be a story about class or wealth or politics. It's just a story about one family. And by God, Succession Season 4 is the best possible version of a story about that family that could possibly exist. It understands its characters so extraordinarily well, with their cringy detachment from reality, the billions of dollars they throw around as barbs to get attention from daddy, the fact that they're all deeply incompetent rich kids who have nothing but their wealth and don't know how to love or care. The show doesn't need to tell me how class alienates people or whatever, it just needs to show me how Tom and Shiv's marriage got alienated by their own ambitions and their own perverse upbringings. It doesn't need to tell me about the interplay between media and politics, it just needs to show me Kendall's arrogance and his sense of entitlement.
I'm the eldest boy!
No other show that I have ever, I repeat ever, watched has made characters that feel just so strikingly real. But I just couldn't possibly imagine reacting to, spoilers ahead, the death of a fictional character the way I did to Logan Roy's and Connor's wedding. The ways that each of the Roy children reacted, the way that Tom tenderly tried to soothe Shiv while still playing his own angle, felt like each of them were genuinely alive. The argument between Tom and Shiv on their balcony is one of the most brutal things I've ever watched. They tear into each other's faults and weaknesses, and you can't help but watch with overwhelming pity for these two broken people. Shiv was destroyed by her father, and Tom was destroyed by his own ambition and then by Shiv. And then they destroyed each other anew. Kendall's begging to be CEO is pathetic and lonely and sad, and when he says he doesn't know if he has anything else, you can't help but feel sorry for him. His emptiness, the way that his father scraped him out, and these insane moments. The directing that bugged me so much in the first 3 seasons is actually brilliant, apparently. It brings me so close to these characters, lets me feel every ounce of these beings, and it lets the actors, who are probably the single most talented cast of actors ever assembled for a show, shine lights into areas of these characters' souls that we couldn't even imagine were accessible. And ultimately, it feels like that's what all this is about, right? Art is about the human experience. And Succession dreamed 5 fully fledged humans into reality, and we watched them all through our screens like they were animals in a zoo as they destroyed each other. This is gonna sound cliche as hell, but we didn't just experience this show, we almost lived it. We lived these characters to a depth that no other show that I can think of has just managed to do. I think that Succession isn't all that great of political or social commentary, but as a character drama, it's legitimately peerless. And for that, it deserves to be here, despite my best efforts. Tony Gilroy.
I think if we're comparing Succession and Better Call Saul as entire shows, from beginning to end, I would prefer Better Call Saul. But when I have to compare their final seasons, how both of these titanous epics have ended, I think Succession comes out on top. Because Season 4 is not only the best season in an already superb show, not only the best in an incredible Emmys lineup, but it is the best final season I think I've ever seen, and I feel pretty confident when saying that, I don't know. But there's no use talking about this show. No way. I just can't do it. There is no point. It's too intimidating, and everybody and their grandmamas have beaten me to it, so I'm done.
Well, that's a wrap, folks.
But if I did want to talk about Succession, I could talk about how all of these events takes place in the course of, like, less than 2 weeks. That's crazy. Succession manages to bounce so much in a fairly compact series of events, fulfilling each and every character's unusually complex arcs, clearly conveying legitimately complicated and realistic business dealings to the normie populace, including me. I am one of the normies, speaking to the tense politics and the role news media could play in making nightmares into reality, and they did it all with pizzazz.
It's not that lemony!
I could talk about how the writing is firing off on all cylinders here, truly living up to unfathomable potential energy this show has been building up to in its prior 3 seasons. Finally, it's all kinetic, baby! And never before have I been so invested in this white-collar Game of Thrones and the varying flawed but compelling players within it. You are not serious people. Cries. I won't talk about that line, but I could talk about the line, how it is savage in its sincerity, and how I have seen it quoted time and time again, to the point of actually becoming a part of everyday lexicon, but I won't, I'll be good. Shut up, me. I could talk about how Connor's wedding is easily one of the top 5 episodes of all of television, and I wouldn't spoil it if I did talk about it, but I might mention that it was easily one of the most shocking pop culture moments I ever caught live, and I swear, I felt a physical shift in the climate after the fact, as though the entire country experienced an earthquake. Connor, you doggone dog, you did it. I could talk about the incredible cast who are all giving some of the most impressive performances to be ever put to screen, and it helps that they are given perfect roles. Each character is just... I could never imagine being able to write such complicated characters myself, but not only does the show manage to make each and every one of them compelling, and unpredictable, and hateable, and sympathetic, but each of them make perfect sense to me. Except maybe Greg, sure, who is kind of the comic relief, but he is amazing comic relief. Damn you! Sarah Snook gives us an incredibly emotional breakdown that has rightfully preordained her the Emmy. Kieran Culkin is awe-inspiring as he makes a complete sleazebag gradually human. Brian Cox continues to play one of the most formidable and intimidating villains to ever be depicted on camera, a true Shakespearean monster, despite the fact that there are so many old and tyrannical CEOs in our current real times. But hot take? I think Matthew Macfadyen is the MVP of a cast full of MVPs for portraying Tom, a character who manages to balance comedy, heartbreak, and badassery super delicately, which feels like the entire ethos of the show, really. I could talk about how Succession, despite being incredibly dramatic and often very intense, is still legitimately funnier to me than most of the comedies, not only because the dialogue is filled with endlessly quotable zingers, but because the show is fully aware of the absurdity of its characters. Going back to what I was saying about the White Lotus, Succession is fully aware that these are all uber-rich stuck-up brats, who don't deserve the lot they have been given in life, and will all make the world a worse place if they get what they want. But it doesn't tell us that over and over again. It shows us what these characters believe, and why they are so bad for us, while still giving us legitimate reasons to care in the moment. Succession puts us into the heads of people whose problems are not all that important, really, and makes it feel world-endingly important. So when the episode is done, and the credits roll, we are left to come to our senses and deconstruct the show for ourselves. This is how you write a show about privilege, unlike hacks like Adam McKay. Its almost mockumentary-style filmmaking does elevate the absurdity even further. For some reason, I don't know, maybe it just makes it easier to imagine all of this actually happening? Who was responsible for this directing style in the first place? I just gotta... Oh, Adam McKay. Oh, well, okay. Okay. Adam McKay only directed the pilot, by the way, and the pilot kinda sucked. Cope. I could talk about Nicholas Bertel, because I want to give him a little smooch. But why should I say all that? Because you already know, you've heard of Succession before, you've probably watched it yourself, and you agree that it should be #1. But why would I say all that about Succession's 4th season, when I could give the show a tribute of a certain flavor?
Need to stop this.